Hi, welcome to Bloom Podcast. I'm Courtney. I am a mental health nurse turned life coach.
And I'm Sydney, a certified Canadian counselor. Together, we're going to be discussing all things mental health and counseling.
We hope you join us.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to our podcast today. So today I am joined by Ann Hince. She is here with us, and she's going to kind of share her story. So I'll give us a brief bio. So Ann, when she was 19, woke up one morning to find her mother dead in her bathroom. 20 years later, the tears from that trauma were still just under the surface. Anne found a simple technique that helped her release these emotions, but she went further and she can now put her awareness into her body and has changed the bone structure of her skull, grown half an inch at age 55, and she's found that seeking out truth and what we truly feel and accepting those feelings is the key to inner peace. So I'm sure, Anne, you're going to tell us all about that in much better detail than what I just kind of provided.
Well, thank you for having me, Sydney. Excuse me. It's lovely to be here.
Yes, we're very excited.
Okay, so I had a lot of trauma in childhood. I think a lot of us do. And I was never taught how to deal with anything. So both of my parents were alcoholics, and I walked on eggshells at home a lot. My dad had anger problems, so I couldn't really say anything. I couldn't make loud noises. He was always right, and I was always, well, it didn't matter it didn't really matter what I thought. So I actually stopped saying things. I actually stopped really talking much at all. So, things built up. And then, when I was 19, I woke up one morning and found my mother dead on the bathroom floor. And that was a huge trauma. I was the only one in the house at the time. So I had to deal with it. And so that was a big trauma, but I didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
We were never taught that, right? So I just didn't do anything. I suppressed it all because I didn't know, there was nothing else I could do because I had no other tools available to me at the time. It was the water I swam in. I didn't know there was anything else that I could have done.
Yeah. Just kind of kept moving forward in that survival mode.
Yeah. So I kept on going with life. I moved out to the States. I was in England at the time. And I got married, and I was a software engineer, and then I had 2 children. And it wasn't until I was in my late 30s and I had 2 children. I was a stay-at-home mom, and I went to a doctor's appointment, and he recognized that I was more stressed than I should be in that situation. Mm-hmm. And he asked me what the stress level was on a scale of 0 through 10, and it was an 8. So then he asked me why. And that's when I knew it was those tears from that event 2 decades earlier were still just under the surface. If I thought about it at all, the tears would come. So he worked with me with this technique called EFT, which is short for emotional freedom technique, and it's also called tapping. He worked with me for about 15 minutes, and I walked away from that appointment being able to tell the story in my mind of finding her that morning without any tears. And it felt like such a shift for me.
Yeah.
But I wanted to make sure it wasn't just a fluke, right? So being an engineer, I kind of like to know things work before I take them on. So I had a cat at home, a 17-year-old cat, and we were told he needed daily saline shots. So the first time I gave him a shot, my hand was shaking so much because I was so scared of doing that. Mm-hmm. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to do it every day unless something changed. So I thought, well, this is a great test case. So I tapped about my fear of hurting my cats, my fear of giving the injection, my hand shaking, and my memories about injections, because I had had a lot of injections. And the next day when I gave him the shot, the needle just slid right in. My hand did not shake at all. It was totally calm. So at that point, I knew that this technique was deceptively powerful because it looks a little odd. It doesn't look like it's doing a lot. Mm-hmm. But I knew at that point that it really was powerful. And I started using it every day. I started noticing when I felt emotional.
Yeah.
And I would catch myself. That's the hardest part, is actually catching yourself as it's happening. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I would catch myself getting emotional, and I would tap about it right then. I apologize for my dog's barking.
No problem.
That's the way it is. Yeah. So as I kept doing this, I found my mind was becoming quieter, which is what I wanted. because I was very reactionary. I was very fearful. My mind was very judgmental, and I didn't like that being that way. So I wanted something to change. And so I kept going, and I realized you could actually write down all your traumas from childhood, or every emotional memory I had from childhood, I wrote down. And I started tapping through one each night. And I did it for about an hour to an hour and a half every night until I'd gone through this list. And my mind was becoming quiet. And then I realized that the voices that I had, or the words that I had been using in my mind, the ones that criticized me and judged other people, had been my dad's words that I had programmed into me in childhood. And I just replayed them over and over again.
Yeah. And that's so common from like many of the clients I've worked with who've had childhood trauma, even trauma as an adult. Sometimes those phrases just stick to us like Velcro, and they become our own voice, but it's someone else's words.
Yeah, we really are programmed in childhood, I do believe. So, and I actually realized at that point, it felt like I was living in a different reality. I remember opening my kitchen door and just feeling so different because my mind wasn't chattering the way it used to in the past. So that was really fun.
Yeah. And to leave behind all of that dialogue that, you know, if you have parents that are drinking, that are maybe more angry, that are more reactionary, they're going to be saying a lot of hurtful words, and to leave those words behind, that sounds huge.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
So I realized this tapping technique, EFT, it actually opens up the subconscious mind, and it creates a depth of awareness. So I started to become aware of my emotions, which I really had suppressed before. And then underneath every emotion is a set of physical sensations. So I started to become aware of those. So, like, you know, we use the word sadness or angry or frustrated. But if we're feeling frustrated, there's actually tension in our body as we're feeling that. But I wasn't aware of that to begin with. I had to go through this process of tapping on my history before I became aware of those physical sensations. And once I became aware of those, I actually was able to use a different technique that I call feeling your feelings, kind of an obvious name, but actually putting a focused attention on the physical sensations, and they would release when I did that. I'm not trying to change them in any way. I'm not trying to judge them or even trying to let them go. I'm just accepting them. And when I would do that, they would shift and let go. And then I would bring the thought back to mind again and feel the sensations again and do it again. And it would shift and let go. And I would do it over and over again with the same thought until the thought no longer had any emotion underneath it. And then they just became words. Like there was freedom in that.
Yeah. So it sounds like all these years you spent having this wall, and every time there was these events that were hard, that were traumatic, it kind of went over the wall into the part that was blocked off. Like, you're not going to feel that. You're just going to keep going. But that wall was so thin, you know, like you were saying, those tears were just under the surface.
Right. But it really is. I mean, it feels very much like a wall to begin with, because it's resistance. There's so much resistance, or there was inside of me. And this process just releases and relaxes that resistance one layer at a time. And that's why the awareness expands, because we have less resistance. I'm sorry, I don't know why my dogs are barking so much.
No problem. But it sounds like as you've gone through, like I would imagine the first time you ever, you know, have this event and then feel that feeling, it's massive. And it sounds like every time you've done it, the wall gets smaller, gets easier to break down, the feeling gets easier to manage. Like, it's like this downhill stream. Is that kind of what had been like for you?
Yeah, it did get easier and easier. Yeah, and as I kept going, I was actually able to let that physical sensation release. And then I was able to keep my awareness inside my body. And then I would do the same thing. I could move my awareness onto a piece of tension and do the same thing, accept it, fully accept it, and it would release. And then I'd do it again and again until that tension was released. So it was during this process that I realized that it's the connective tissue that we're holding the tension in. And so that's relates back to calling it almost a wall, right? It's because the connective tissue is throughout our whole body. Mm-hmm. And if we hold a lot of that tension in our chest or our abdomen area, it's really like this shield that we put up.
Yeah.
And all those memories, all that tension is held in the connective tissue, and that is our shield.
Yeah.
And we're breaking it down.
Well, and I think of, someone who has anxiety or someone who has depression, or they're experiencing a situation or a memory or a thought that causes those feelings, right? You think someone feels anxiety in their chest, or, someone who's angry might clench their fists. There's these obvious times where we feel these feelings in our body, but then there's these times that are way more difficult to tap into that feeling in our body.
Because we get so caught up in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. When we get so caught up in the energy of the emotion, it's hard to pull back and see it. But that's one of the reasons why EFT is so great, because you can do it anywhere. You don't actually have to use the mind too much, right? You can be fully engulfed in the emotion and tap, and it's still working.
That's amazing. Especially because I think a lot of times when we're in situations that have really big, overwhelming emotion, we're not always conveniently at home alone in our room or whatever. There's lots of times where maybe we're in a meeting where someone is saying something that's setting off things inside of us, or we're, in a interpersonal kind of struggle with someone, whether it's friends or family or coworkers. We're not always just at home in a place that's convenient.
Right. So with EFT, to begin with, you might not want to do it in front of someone like that. Yeah, you might want to take a moment and head to the bathroom and tap right there. Yeah, to let some of that charge go and then come back and join the conversation.
Yeah, but to have that tool in your tool belt to be able to step away and not just be relying on, okay, I'm going to go to the bathroom and wash my hands and hope that time away is enough. To have that way to bump up that way to deal with your emotions is huge.
Right. And I've realized why EFT, I believe, is so powerful, and it's because of that physical aspect, because we're actually tapping on the body and releasing that stored tension. Yeah. So, emotions, I really know now that it's just stuck energy. It's just energy that's been stuck in the body that we've programmed in from childhood. So if we can do something physical to let that energy release, then it's gone. Mm-hmm. Each time we do any of this work, this tapping work, it's a permanent shift. And when we change our now vibration, we change our future. So even 5 minutes of tapping can make a huge difference, not only to right now, but to the future.
Yeah. And so I'm wondering, you're saying tapping, and I've watched a couple of your YouTube videos, and so I know what that looks like, but I'm wondering if maybe for people who are listening, if you could kind of explain what's going on when you're saying you're doing tapping.
Yeah. It's a little like acupressure. So what we're doing is we're tapping quite firmly, but not firm enough to hurt ourselves. We're tapping on specific places in the body that are the ends of meridian systems. So that's the Chinese system of energy. So we're tapping, the first point we tap on is the karate chop point, which is where we would hit the side of our hand if we were doing a karate chop.
Yeah, kind of right below your pinky almost.
Right, yeah, between the pinky and the wrist on the side of the hand.
Yeah.
So that's the first place we're tapping on. And that's where we do a setup phrase. And I've changed the phrasing somewhat from the original phrasing. The original phrasing was like, even though, say, my dad was shouting at me, I deeply and completely love and accept myself. I found a lot of people have resistance to saying, I deeply and completely love and accept myself. So that then they concentrate on that and not on what we're actually wanting to work on.
Right. There's kind of some other stuff to deal with within that for themselves already.
Yeah. So I say something like, even though my dad was shouting at me, that's my truth in this moment. And it's okay that I feel that way. Yeah. So then we tap there. We say that 3 times. And then the next points, and I'll just say them out loud because I know we're just audio. The next point is the top of our head, the crown point on our head. and then the beginning of our eyebrow, and then the bone on the edge of an eye, then the bone under the eye, then under our nose on the upper lip, then on our chin, then our collarbone, and then under the arm. And then we take a deep breath and we let it go. And that's one round of EFT. So it's very simple.
Yeah. And so when you're doing the tapping, are you like, as you go through each point, are you saying that phrase over and over again?
Yes. So at each point, I would say something like, my dad was shouting at me, or I was afraid because my dad was shouting at me, right? Which is that slightly deeper level of the emotion involved as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, if I was stressed about something, that would be what I was using. It's like, I'm really stressed about something. Whatever it is that is your truth in the moment,
Yeah.
right? That you're feeling in the moment, those are the words you would use. So I suggest, if you can't think of the words, and that's the hardest part that people have is the words they need to use. And I recommend just imagining you're telling your best friend about, or someone who is totally unconditionally accepting of you.
Yeah.
You're telling them exactly what you want to tell them, and just tap as you're telling that story or what you're feeling, and just do it over and over again. So with my mother's death, I had to tap over and over again. So that first 15 minutes with the doctor took the first layers off.
Yeah.
But then more details of the story came to mind because I was opening up that wound inside of me.
Yeah.
Right. It really was a dis-ease inside of me. Yeah. And I was opening it up and looking at it really clearly and letting the stored emotion, letting it go. So that's what we do. We want to do it over and over again until we can say it like we're reading from a book. Like there's no emotion left in the voice.
Yeah. And it sounds like a big point, when I'm thinking of saying it to a best friend or someone who is so accepting, it sounds like that's kind of rooted in that non-judgmental, right? When it sounds like when you're kind of thinking of, I love and accept myself fully, sometimes that brings out those judgmental pieces in ourselves. And so instead flipping it to that script of, that is my truth in this moment, kind of allows us to really settle into that non-judgmental piece. Is that a key part?
That's what we're doing, is we're finding our truth in the moment and we're allowing it to be okay. Right? So it's okay that I'm feeling stressed right now. It's okay that I hate that person.
Yeah.
Right? It's okay that I'm angry right now.
Yeah.
Whatever our truth is, we accept it. Because once I got to the inside, once I put my awareness on the tension in the connective tissue, all I need to work on is accepting the negative, the tension that I'm feeling there. Because when I fully accept it, it shifts and lets go. Yeah. So with EFT, we're just fully accepting the emotion or the feeling that we're having right now. And when we focus on it and accept it fully, it releases.
Which I think for some people is so huge, because I think sometimes it can feel like certain emotions are good emotions while other emotions are bad emotions. Like we shouldn't feel angry or we shouldn't dislike someone because that's so unbecoming or that's not acceptable.
Right. And when we do that, we suppress it.
Yeah. Like I shouldn't feel this way, so I'm just going to push it down until I feel another way, rather than allowing that emotion to be and subsequently release.
Yes. Yeah. And that's what I found along the way. I didn't really have that understanding so much when I started EFT, but now that I can get deeper inside, it's like, that's what we're doing. We're finding the truth, whatever it is, right? If I hate something, I would much rather feel that hate and let it go, so it's no longer in my body, than suppress it and keep it inside.
Yeah. And I think what I love hearing about this is we're not trying to muddle in the facts or kind of question what really happened or how should I feel. It's just noticing what's happening in this moment. How are you feeling in this moment? And releasing. You don't have to kind of go back and forth on, which part is true or am I remembering it correctly?
Yeah, it's we're just noticing how we're feeling and accepting it in the moment. Yeah, one of the really interesting things about my story with my mother is that my brother, who was not there at the time that she died, he was at his girlfriend's house. his memory, or what he told his wife about the event, was that he had caught my mother when she died. And he lived with that memory of what he thought was the truth for years. But I think he was just suppressing the guilt and the other feelings that he didn't want to feel because he hadn't been there. He's died now, so he can't say anything in defense of that. But that's my belief, because before he died, I did tap with him for a little while and reminded him that I had to get him from his girlfriend's house.
Yeah.
And then he remembered what had actually happened.
Wow. Yeah. And I think sometimes we have a totally different sequence of events than someone else. And there are times where that's really important, but there are also times where that sequence of events, trying to sort out the facts, is just, it's irrelevant for us. That letting go of emotion is the more impactful piece.
Yeah, it is, because that opens up what's underneath, and what's underneath may, like as in my brother, it may be the truth, right?
Yeah.
It may be the truth is underneath and we've just hidden it because it's too scary, or we just don't want to look at it.
Yeah, some things can feel too big or too painful, and we kind of, in that effort to survive, we kind of mask it with whatever we need to in that moment.
We do, yeah. So when we're trying to go through the childhood traumas that I went through, I would bring that memory to mind, right, so that I could bring the emotions into my now.
Yeah.
Right, because that's what we're tapping on. We're tapping on what we feel right now. So we have to bring that memory into the now, and then we can tap on it.
Mm-hmm. And so it sounds like, in terms of if someone was using this in a really stressful moment or an overwhelming moment, they wouldn't even need to do that because they're in that moment right then and there.
Right. So you don't even need words at that point, right? Yeah. If you're really feeling it, because it's releasing that tension in the body, all you need to do is tap.
Yeah. And so I would imagine as you go through tapping, if you're releasing that emotion, you probably are better able to put words to it as you go, because it's kind of, that level is going down. I always think, when I'm feeling really highly emotional, I find words really are hard to come by.
Yes, definitely. Once the charge has released, you can remember it better, and you have better words, more detailed. You can get more detail in the words.
That's amazing. Yeah. And so I think, kind of thinking more about that tapping piece, does it matter like how long you're tapping? Are you kind of counting, or do you just move from one point to the next as it feels right? What does that part look like?
Yeah, we generally tap about 5 to 7 times on each point, and then move to the next point. Mm-hmm. But there is also a technique that I used in a group that I had before COVID, where we would tap on each point until there was a release. So the release would be like a sigh, or we'd take a deep breath and relax, and then we'd move to the next point and tap on that point until there was a release. So there's a couple of different ways that you can do it.
It sounds like, it's almost like, I keep picturing it like an onion. Like the outer skin is the toughest. And kind of as you go through, it gets easier and easier and smaller to manage to the point where there's just nothing left and it's easy going.
Well, that sounds nice, doesn't it? I'm not sure it's actually like that, because as I went, it kind of comes and goes. I think of it like a rope that's held taut, right, bent over. Mm-hmm. Then you cut the first strand of that rope, and then the tension is taken up by maybe 2 or 3 other ropes. And you cut through those, and maybe the next one is just taken up by one. So it doesn't necessarily get easier. It might get easier for a little while, and then you are shown the next level.
Right.
And then you might have to work on that. Right. So once I actually got to be able to put my awareness inside my head, there was so much pain and tension in there that I had no idea lived inside of me. So, that was a big layer that I uncovered right there, and had that awareness at a deeper level. So now I'm working through that and letting that go.
Yeah. And I think, there are so many things that we go through in life that it makes sense to me that things can kind of keep popping up, because there's these big things that are kind of that first level, right? So for you, it was your mother's passing and finding her. But once we've kind of gotten through those, it makes so much sense to me that there's all these other little pieces, and maybe not so little pieces, that we keep finding and dealing with.
Yeah. But along the way, I mean, I should say this, that along the way, things get better.
Yeah.
It's not all really hard work.
Yeah.
Things get better. The mind gets quieter. At the point I'm at now, my voice has improved. My singing voice has improved because I've let go of the tension in my skull, right? My balance is better because my body is more balanced. So I'm emotionally more balanced and physically more balanced. My taste is better, right? I can foods just taste amazing to me, right? So the whole body improves. And then on the outside as well, right? I'm aware at a much deeper level at the outside because I'm aware at a deeper level on the inside. So life becomes more fulfilling, more fun because there's more depth to it.
Well, and I would imagine too, as that releasing is happening and the chatter is quieting, you have more brain power, more bandwidth to even pay attention to life.
Yeah, right. We're actually releasing the burden that we've carried all those years. So we even feel lighter, right? We're more joyful. And so
that's
everything
amazing.
Works better.
And it like, for me, I guess when I think about these things that I've worked on in therapy with clients, it kind of just makes sense to me as it's like you start this snowball rolling, and there are things that pop up, but like you're saying, there's all these wonderful things that come along with it. And also you're better at tapping, you're better at releasing that emotion, you're more in tune with your body, you're more in tune with your emotions. So even it sounds like, and tell me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like even though hard things may pop up, I would imagine it's never as hard to kind of tap through it or navigate through it as it was those first few times.
Right, because once you know that it works, once you know there's freedom on the other side, you know that you can do it. Yeah. So it is easier to deal with. You have a distance from it. You can see it for what it is, and then it's just stuck energy. And you just need to work with it to release it.
Yeah.
You don't get caught up in it the same way.
That's amazing. And so do you find, like, in general, I mean, I think everyone has things that kind of seem to kind of push their buttons more than others. Do you find now, after going through this, that you're a little bit less easily button pushed?
A lot less. I'm a lot less reactionary than I was. Yeah, I'm pretty calm these days. I have a 19-year-old son who rides mountain bikes, and he likes to try and see if he can push my buttons, right? He shows me these videos of these crazy things that people do on mountain bikes. So I just work with that now. I watch the news now. I didn't for a long time, but I watch it now because I want to know what triggers me, because I know I can work to release that. And that, to me, that is an expansion of awareness. So that's what I'm looking for.
It's like you're embracing every facet of life full on because you know you have the capability to handle it.
Yes. Yeah.
That's amazing.
That's what I'm doing.
That's amazing. Okay. Well, we're coming to the end of our time for today. We've talked, I feel like I have learned so much. I'm truly, honestly, I'm thrilled for our listeners to hear this episode because I think that this is going to be life-changing for some of them. I'm wondering, is there anything that we haven't touched on that you really would like to leave our listeners with?
I would love everybody to know or to understand that our part of every equation is how we feel about it. And we have control over those feelings. So if we're watching the news, if we're involved in some of the division that we have these days, and we feel something about the other side of whatever it is, then we can take control of how we feel about it. We can let those emotions dissipate, because then we can come together in peace. And I think that's how we can change the world.
That's amazing. Awesome. Okay. So if you want to hear more from Ann, I will have all of her links in our show notes. I will specifically link to her YouTube. She has some amazing videos if you need more visual kind of stuff about tapping, as well as you can find her on her website at annhince.com. And I'll put that as well as her book link all in our show notes. So thank you so much, Ann, for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for letting me share my story.
Okay. Thanks so much for listening, everybody, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for listening. You can follow us on our socials, thebloom.podcast on Instagram and Bloom on Facebook. Rate, review, share, and subscribe today.
This is not intended to be taken as medical advice. Please seek medical help for any mental health needs. If you are experiencing a crisis, please go to your nearest ER.